Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 446 for the 20th of Shevat in a regular year. I'd like to begin today's episode by discussing a scene in one of my favorite movies of all times. It was actually my favorite movie as a kid. It's also a book, and this movie and book is called The Never Ending Story. And it's a really amazing book. It's an amazing movie, and the book was actually a bestseller in many different languages all around the world, from what I understand. The movie actually cuts off in the middle of the book, and the movie finishes halfway through the book and then the book goes on. Anyways, it's not so important, but the main point I want to bring is there is a scene in that movie which is such a powerful scene as far as I'm concerned, and it's so powerful that and so related to today's chapter that I might actually link to that scene in the YouTube when I post this, so you can really have a visual to go along with it. And the scene involves something which is called the swamp of sadness. So just to give a little bit of context is, I don't have to get into the entire plot of the movie, but basically it's a story within a story. And so the story within a story involves this boy, Atreyu, who is the hero, and he is on a mission to save his world from the nothing, from this powerful force that's going to destroy his world. And along the way, he encounters many challenges and goes through all these travels, and it's like this really big adventure kind of thing. And along the way he takes with him his beloved horse, and his horse is named Artax, and the horse goes with him on all these travels and help and they get very close. And one of the encounters that they have is they come across this swamp, and the swamp, as we come to know, is called the swamp of sadness. And why it's called the swamp of sadness is because what happens is, as the person starts, or the animal or whatever it is that's trying to cross the swamp, as they begin to cross the swamp, they start to feel this overwhelming sense of sadness. And in order to get across the swamp, you have to really fight against this sadness, or else it really weighs you down so much that it could eventually take the person or the animal down into it, and the sadness could actually make whoever is trying to pass through the swamp drown into the swamp and not come out. And so the scene is basically where we see Atreyu and his horse, and they are traveling through this swamp, and you see them becoming really, really sad and starting to get weighed down. And Atreyu is a fighter, and he's really fighting, and he fights and fights and fights, and somehow he's able to overcome this sadness. But the horse is not having as good a time, and the horse starts sinking and sinking and sinking. And you see Atreyu pleading and screaming at the horse to snap out of it, to come out of it, not to let the sadness overcome him. And alas, it's really sad. It doesn't work. And the horse ends up drowning in the swamp of sadness. It's a really sad scene, and it's really powerful. When you're trying to get a victory over something physical, for example, let's say if you have two people that are wrestling one with the other in order to bring the person down, if one of these people is very lazy and very heavy, then he is going to be won over very easily, and he will fall down even if he is stronger than his friend. So just to elaborate on this a little bit, so imagine if you have these two guys that are wrestling in a wrestling match, and they're both of equal strength or equal weight or whatever it is, or maybe even one of them is stronger than the other one. If that one that is stronger than the other one, if he is feeling sad and heavy, if he's in this state of despondency, there is no way that he's going to win that fight, no matter how strong he is. And so now the Alter Rebbe says that this analogy that we're using with physical fighting and with physical wrestling is very applicable to our fight with our Yetzer Hara. So if you recall, we talked about this idea about how we have this internal battle all the time between our two souls, our animal soul and our godly soul. You can go back to previous episodes to hear more about that, and about how it's like two kings that are trying to rule over the city, which is the body. And when one of them rises, the other one falls, and you can't have both kings ruling the same nation. So our mission in life basically is trying to constantly overcome our evil inclination, constantly overcome our animal soul and win over it. And so what the Alter Rebbe teaches us here is that he says that similar to these two wrestlers fighting in a physical fight, this is true with our fight against our evil inclination. We cannot win it if we are in this state of laziness and heaviness. And where does laziness and heaviness come from? Like, what's the source of this laziness and heaviness? It comes from sadness, and it comes from a blockage of the heart, like a rock. And rather, how is it that we could win over the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is with alacrity. And where does alacrity come from? Alacrity comes from joy and the opening of the heart, having an open heart. And so basically, to understand this, just basically in order, if we want to overcome any evil inclination that we have, any negativity, we need a certain motivation. We need to be in a certain state of like energetic, be somewhat energetic. And where does this energeticness come from? This alacrity that we need to like conquer the day. When people say like seize the day, it comes from joy. And if we don't have this joy, then it's just going to bring us down. So before we go further, maybe, if you could take a moment to really think about this in your own life and see if you can think about a time in your life when maybe you weren't at your best and you weren't being very accomplished in what you needed to do. And then think about other times in your life when you were very accomplished, when you were very productive and active and everything. And what was your state of mind in both of those times? Most likely in the first time you were kind of in this heavy, sad state. Maybe maybe something had happened. Maybe you had gone through a bad breakup. Maybe, there was a tragedy that you suffered, something like that. And those kind of things can really bring a person down and make a person not be very productive. And then think about why it is that sometimes you do wake up and you are feeling more productive. What's going on in your life in those moments? Most likely you're in a happier frame of mind and in a good state of mind. So this could be why, for example, so many people drink coffee, believe it or not. So, when we think about drinking coffee or drinking caffeine, people usually think, why do I drink caffeine? It's in order to give me energies. So dopamine, for those of you who are somewhat familiar with neurobiology or psychology or anything like that, you'll know that dopamine is a neuromodulator, otherwise known as a hormone, which leads a person to feel feelings of motivation, of drive, of wanting to conquer the day, those kind of feelings. And so what happens is when we drink caffeine, it's not that the caffeine brings in more dopamine, but the caffeine slows down the rate of reabsorption of dopamine in the brain, thus allowing for more dopamine to flow through the brain. So the basic idea is that even on a physiological level, we can see and understand that there's a real connection between being alert, feeling energized, and being in a good mood and feeling motivated to take on the day, which really explains the widespread caffeine addiction in our culture. So now getting back to the text. So now the Alter Rebbe brings up a verse from Mishlei, chapter 14, verse 23, which seemingly seems to contradict or seems to at least add some kind of question to what the Alter Rebbe is teaching here, where it says, B'chol etzev yeh mutar. So, which literally means that in every sadness, there is an advantage. So this seems to say that there is something good about being sad, right? So there is a time and place for being sad and there's something good about it. But the Alter Rebbe says, no, we have to read the verse in a more literal way. When you look at it really more specifically, you'll see that what it's saying here is that there is nothing good about sadness in its own right. And the only way that it has an advantage to it is that if an advantage comes out of it, if there's something good that comes out of it. So in every sadness, there should be an advantage that comes out of it. So what is the advantage that could come out of sadness? This is the true joy in God, your God or his God, that comes after the true sadness at very specific times when a person feels a certain bitterness in their soul and through a broken heart. And that through this brokenness of the spirit, of the impure spirit and the sitra achra, and the barrier of iron that is separating between him and his Father in heaven, meaning God. And then now the Alter Rebbe brings a teaching here from the Zohar on a verse from Tehillim, chapter 51, verse 19, where it says, "Ruach nishbera, lev nishbar, v'gomer," which literally means a broken spirit and a broken heart you will not despise. So, and then if you look in the same Tehillim, a few verses before that, in verse 10, it says, Tashmi'eni sason v'simcha v'gomer, that you make me hear joy and gladness. So what the Zohar does is it connects these two things together. And it says that how is it that you get restored to joy and gladness is through a broken spirit and through a broken heart. And then the Alter Rebbe says that this is the simple reason why the Arizal instituted that we should say this Tehillim, where it's talking about this idea of a broken spirit and broken heart and joy and everything like that. So this is Tehillim 51 again, so that we should say this after saying Tikkun Chatzot, before learning, in order that our learning should be with true joy in God that comes after sadness. So just to give a little bit of background with this, so there's this thing called Tikkun Chatzot, which some Jews say, which is basically a prayer where people wake up in the middle of the night. It's set at midnight, and it's about where we mourn over the temple and mourn over our exile and everything like that. And it's like kind of like a time for a person to really contemplate their sins and contemplate their inequities and think about how that's contributing to the exile that we're in. So it's a very sad kind of thing. But so what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is that while after saying this Tikkun Chatzot, the Arizal instituted that we should say this prayer, this Tehillim, in which we learn about how a broken spirit and a broken heart can lead a person to true joy, to really take this sadness that a person gets in this time of Tikkun Chatzot, that's most likely going to make them very sad if they do it properly, and transform this sadness into a bitterness and a brokenness of the heart that will lead to true joy. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says that this joy, this true joy in God that will come after sadness, is a really, really deep joy, because this joy has a huge advantage in the sense that it's the same way that light has an advantage when it comes out of darkness rather than just light itself. So if you imagine this idea of, let's say if you've been in a really dark cave for a really long time and you haven't experienced a lot of light, you are going to appreciate light so much, or let's say like if you've ever had like a blackout in your house and the electricity's been down and everything, and then all of a sudden the lights go on, it's like you have this huge feeling of joy, and you really appreciate that light. And in a more emotional state, you can think about this also if you've ever, God forbid, been in a really deep, dark place, like a depression of some sort, or just like really in not a great state, and then you overcome it and you emerge out of it, then the joy that comes from coming out of that deep state is a very, very deep joy. And then to support this, then the Alter Rebbe brings a quote from the Zohar, and this is from the book of Kohelet, chapter 2, verse 13, where it says about Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, so that literally means that I saw that there was an advantage to wisdom over folly, just like there was an advantage to light over darkness. So same idea of basically once if a person is in a state of folly and then they have this like revelation of wisdom, that's a huge, like that wisdom is going to be so much more valued and so much more valuable than if it was just wisdom and it's on its own without that preceding folly. And then the Alter Rebbe also further supports his his argument for the fact that joy is really important by bringing a selection of a verse from Devarim, chapter 28, verse 47, where it says, that meaning that, and that's referring to the fact that because you did not serve God, your Lord, with joy, then all of these punishments will come to you, God forbid. So basically it's the precept of serving God with joy is not just like this like extra little thing that's nice, it's good to be happy, but basically it's something really essential and crucial for our service of God. And according to the Arizal, which the Alter Rebbe is sort of hinting at here at the very end of this section, is that this is specifically referring to the fact that the Jews need to serve God with an added measure of joy when they are in a state of lack and affliction and not in the best space. So that's the end of this section. So just to give a little recap, is what we learned so far is that we learned that being sad is really not a good thing because it really weighs a person down and it makes us unable to it brings a state of lethargy and a state of heaviness, and this making us unable to win our fight against our evil inclinations. Just like if you have two wrestlers and one of them is really heavy and weighed down, they will be unable to win the fight, even if they're very strong and very muscular and everything. And then we talked about how this state of sadness really, really has no value on its own, and there's nothing good about being sad in your own right. But if you are able to take your sadness and if you're able to use it for a very specific purpose in order to serve God, then it could have an advantage. And so what is that specific purpose, and specifically to move it into a state of where you can become joyous is if you take very specific times and you use this sadness to come to a state of bitterness, which leads you to brokenness of your heart and your spirit. And that from this state of brokenness of the heart and the spirit, this allows for space for God to enter in and for God to take you out of your sadness and transform you into a state of joy. So that's the end of the section for today. And tomorrow we're going to continue and we're going to start to learn some tools and techniques that the Alter Rebbe has for us, how to overcome our sadness when it does come up in our daily lives. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.